Hello there, people of the internet. This right here is going to be a little series that I'm doing in hopes of earning myself up to 100,000 subscribers. What I'm doing is I'm going through every single firearm inside of my arsenal, and I'm going to be talking about them in depth, and we're going to go ahead and send some lead downrange with them as well. Before we get started, support GOAing FPC. We definitely need them right now. It's very, very important that they get all of our support. So today's firearm that we're going to be looking at, I have an 1891 pattern Mosin Nagant rifle. This particular one has been updated and created, well, sort of by the Finnish. We're not going to talk about Finnish Mosins, we're just going to talk about the 1891 Mosin in general. We'll go ahead and touch on Finnish Mosins in a later episode. So whenever we start talking about the Mosin, we're going to go ahead and start off this particular series talking about the very beginning origins of the Mosin Nagant, or the three-line rifle. So this right here, this is the 1891 pattern. And obviously, you can tell from the sling swivels and from a couple of other things with this rifle that it is a Finnish refurbishment. Is that what I would call that? We're going to call it a Finnish refurbishment for a lack of a better term. The Finnish, during the Winter War and Continuation War, took a lot of these Mosins, and they basically made them as good as they possibly could. But that right there, like I said, is a topic for another time. The Mosin, whenever it was originally adopted by the Imperial Russian back in 1891, it was to replace the Russians' Berdan rifles, which were a large-bore, single-shot black powder rifle, which was pretty much on par with what every other country was doing at the time. So during this time period, whenever smokeless powder had first been invented by the French, all of these main countries, the large countries, the powerful ones during that time period, they were looking into making some sort of smaller bore, faster moving projectile. There's a lot of pros and cons between having a smaller projectile that is traveling faster, lighter weight, carry more ammo, easier to maneuver with, etc., etc. And basically every country was looking to get themselves a new repeating bolt action style rifle that they could go ahead and issue to their main military forces. One of the big things with smokeless powder is it increased the distance that people would be able to shoot at, simply because of the increased pressures and increased velocities of the projectiles. Black powder is more of an explosive than it is a propellant, and so as a result you cannot really get all that much velocity out of a projectile, unlike with the smokeless powder that was created. So the Mosin rifle is ultimately what Russia would adopt. There were a grand total of 3 different rifles that were issued to the trials to adopt this rifle to replace the Berdan rifle. I know that this right here, thank you, Kevin. I know that this right here, Mosin's rifle, was ultimately adopted. The man, what was his name? I have myself a little cheat sheet over here. His name was, he was a Belgian designer, Leon Nagant. I say Nagant, and that's how I'm going to pronounce it. Leon Nagant. I apologize if I'm butchering that name. A Belgian designer. He issued a rifle, and that rifle was actually declined during these trials whenever the Mosin rifle won out. However, Leon Nagant ended up issuing a suit. He filed for a suit because the Mosin rifle, something about the actual interrupter inside of the system, he said that it patented, or it infringed on one of his patents for his rifle, and so as a result, ultimately this suit found in favor of Nagant, and his name was tacked on to the Mosin rifle. The development process for this rifle started in 1892, ended in 1891. That was whenever it was ultimately adopted. It was used by the Imperial Russians and the Soviet Union. And a grand total of 37 million variants of this rifle were made. There were a lot of Mosins made. This right here is a 5-shot bolt action rifle, repeating rifle, fed from stripper clips. This right here, 7.62 by 54 rimmed. These are 174 grain projectiles that are going to be traveling at about 2,600 or so feet per second. So definitely not a lightweight projectile, and it's definitely not traveling slow at all. That is absolutely a full power rifle cartridge. The original Nagant rifle that was instituted into the trials was actually a 35 caliber rifle. It was a 9mm caliber rifle. I'm not sure what the actual chambering was, but it was a 35 caliber rifle that was issued, and it was seen to be, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? The quality control and the quality of those rifles were not that great, which is one of the main reasons why the Russians kind of turned them down. and so they actually took in favor of Nagant's rifle, or not Nagant's, Mosin's rifle. There was a third rifle that was issued by some captain. I can't quite remember who it was. Not off the top of my head, but we're not talking about his rifle. We're talking about these ones. So the original Mosin rifle was in a 7.62 millimeter cartridge, and I believe the captain's, that mystery third rifle, I believe the captain's rifle was also a 7.62 millimeter rifle. So with Nagant suing to get his name thrown into the common, what would I call it? It's not officially a Mosin Nagant rifle. Here in Western media, it's called the Mosin Nagant just because of that lawsuit that was filed by Nagant. However, in a vast majority of the world, this right here is simply called Mosin's rifle, and it is a 7.62 by 54 rimmed bolt action rifle. So that being said, there are a lot of these that were made. Production of these continued for quite a substantial amount of time. They were eventually replaced by the 9130, which we will review in a later video on this series. So let's go ahead and prop this thing up, send a couple of rounds downrange. We will be firing this right here. This is just Tolama steel case, full metal jackets. We're going to send these downrange and see what we can hit our target with. Yes, this one does not have a rear sight on it, so I'm sure that people are going to point that out in the comments, but that's not going to stop me from sending lead with it. Alright, you guys have seen me shoot this rifle on the channel before, but hey, that's not going to stop me from firing this thing. The Mosin, not really, well, now we're going to go ahead and talk about the rifle itself. Not really the most elegant of actions. It is a very, very, very strong one, and it is a rifle that will outlast you as long as you take care of it. We got two huge locking lugs in the front of the bolt that lock into the front of the receiver here. And we do have one thing that I do not like about the Mosin. We have this rail system on the bottom of the bolt itself that actually rides in conjunction with a cutout in the receiver itself. And that rail system, it's supposed to add stability to the rifle, and it's supposed to add, what's the word I'm looking for? It's supposed to make it a better, stronger, smoother action, but it kind of does the opposite of that in terms of smoothness. What it does is it just adds this extra surface area for friction, and as a result, the bolt's not great. The bolt is not great on the Mosin. It's clunky, it's awkward, it's definitely not the most, like I said, not the most elegant design. So we got ourselves 5 rounds inside of a stripper clip. This right here is a brass stripper clip. I have no idea what the origins of it is. This right here is new manufactured Tolama though. So we're going to go ahead and shove a couple of rounds inside of this thing. I don't like the 54 rimmed. Actually, that was not that bad. I don't like the 54 rimmed, well, I just don't like rimmed cartridges in general, because feeding them from a stripper clip can be inconsistently difficult. Not only that, but although this does have an interrupter on it, we still do have some issues with rim lock from the Mosin rifle. And rim lock is very much a real thing, especially if you have cartridges, modern-made cartridges that don't have any chamfers or anything on them. So let's see. We had no rim lock with that one right there. I'm going to send a couple of rounds downrange just at our car down there. I got a steel target down there. We're at about 50-ish yards or so. Let's send some lead. Well, we hit our steel target, and I'm amazed it did not fall down. My steel target, I just kind of have it propped up on the rim of the car down there, and as a result, I was expecting it to fall down on the first shot, but she's still standing. Let's send another round. Well, we hit it pretty good that time. So these right here, like I said, are 174 grain projectiles. They're traveling at about 2,600 feet per second. And that right there is a very fast bullet. That's a heavy bullet. Normally with your 30 caliber rounds, especially here in the United States, we're used to dealing with things that are more around the 150 grain projectile, especially if we're talking military loadings. But 150 grain projectile that travels around 2,800 feet per second, this is traveling a little bit slower, but it does have more mass behind it. So this right here, the 7.62 by 54 rimmed from a full-length Mosin barrel, is on par with the energy transfer of a 30-06. And boy, can you feel it. This right here is a heavy rifle. I'm not sure how heavy this rifle actually is. If I had to make a bet, rough estimations, maybe 10.5, 11 pounds, if I had to guess. But even then, this right here still does have quite a bit of recoil with that 7.62 by 54 rimmed. Of course, we do have a metal butt plate on this thing, so I could not imagine. What could I not imagine? I can't imagine what I can't imagine. I would imagine, that's what I meant to say, that if you had yourself a better butt plate on this thing than like one of those modern tech rubber butt plates on this thing, or I guess at that point it'd be a butt pad, the recoil on this would be a lot less harsh. There are aftermarket butt plates that I could throw on this thing, but I'm not gonna, because this is in its original configuration. One round left. Let's send it down at the steel target. Why not? Even without sights at 50 yards, it's pretty easy to hit things with a rifle. I still do have a reference point for our rear sight. The rear sight has these two little nubs on it, and our front sight up there is still there. So I just kind of gauge for the idea as to where the reference point would actually be at. These original rifles, the original 3-line rifles, a lot of times whenever we're dealing with milsurps, we will deal with rifles that sight their leaf sights out for either meters or yards, depending on the time period, location, where it was made, etc., etc. The Russians actually sighted these early rifles out for arshins. And an arshin was a unit of measurement based on the average step of your average conscripted soldier. So it's actually a really good way to gauge a certain distance, because, well, these soldiers would think, all right, it would take approximately 100 paces or 150 paces or whatever for me to reach that location, so I'm going to go ahead and sight this out for about there, and that will give me a rough ballpark on where it is that I'll be hitting. And so as a result, that was kind of just their sighting system. We do have this very interesting, I'm not sure what I would call this, it almost looks like the back of a fish. A fish fin. We're going to call it a fish fin. We have this fish fin style of elevation. We don't have a leaf sight, so I can't really show that off. And since this right here is a finished rifle, we do have some changes in the designations of the elevation, but we're not talking about the finished rifle. We're just talking about the Mosin in general, the 1891 pattern Mosin. Later variations would make the Mosin much more economic, and they would shorten it up and lighten it up quite a substantial amount. This right here, for what it is, even though it is a wood and steel long length rifle, it is still a pretty substantially heavy rifle. I cannot attest for how easy it is to actually acquire sights with this thing, but I have seen 1891 patterns before. I have not messed with a finished pattern, but I have seen the 1891 patterns before, and I have seen the sights on those. And the sights are not great, pretty standard of the time period, little tiny notch on the back of the rear sight. And you got yourself your front post front sight, and it's just, as a blind guy, it's hard for me to line those up. In all honesty, I'm probably more accurate with this thing without sights than I would be with it with sights. So thank you for watching, folks. I'm going to kind of play this series by ear, see what I can do with it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed checking out the 1891 Mosin. Hopefully I gave you guys a little bit of history, some stuff that maybe you guys did not know. I know in my research for this rifle, for this video, I learned quite a bit of stuff myself about the Mosin Nagant, where it came from, and some of the history and whatnot behind the rifle. So hopefully you guys learned something as well, and hopefully this video earned your subscription. If it did not, then maybe I'll try again on the next one, where we check out another rifle and the history and whatnot behind that rifle as well. So stay tuned for that. We will dive into that on the next episode, and I'll see y'all there. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.